Jerry, what the hell is going on with this?
Hey, you humans have 5 nights at Freddy's. I'm allowed to have this.
It's not funny, Jerry. This problem's out of control. Listen, Jerry, it's been hard, Jerry. It's been hard. But we're gonna get through. What the hell is that?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Ryan Reacts. Today, folks, we are watching Why Japan Surrendered by Potential History, a video sponsored by Imperial Officer. Thank you, Imperial Officer, and if you want to sponsor too, the link is down below. But of course, folks, like check out the original link, more for original content career, link be in the description.
You ever heard of George Pickett?
Shit! I've never been so intimidated by the start of a video in my entire life. But my main takeaway is, man, we used to do buttons so much better. Their button game was on another level. That being said, their hair, my God. He looks like an 80-year-old third grade teacher. Oh, and to answer your question, no, I have no idea who that man is, so I guess we're going to find out about the man with beautiful buttons. I trust him. I think he's a good man.
You ever heard of George Pickett? He was a general, perfume enthusiast, war criminal. And
5 seconds. It only takes 5 seconds to make Hobo Ryan look like a fucking idiot.
in order to carry out the disastrous charge that would forever have his name attached to it at Gettysburg. Post-war, there was a fascination in the U.S. over the defeat there. And, as you can imagine, Pickett was often asked what he thought was the cause of this huge defeat. But whenever asked, his reply was always the same. I think the Yankees had something to do with it.
It's a bold choice to ask the man who lost miserably. So what do you think went wrong? Also, I should mention, I'm watching a historical video as somebody who got this on every single grade he's ever gotten on history. So if I ask or say dumb things, I apologize. I'm a buffoon. But it is weird. As I've gotten older, war is so much more interesting than I was as a kid. Like, you told me about this war as a kid. I was like, shit's boring and old. Now I'm 30. I'm just like, this is the most interesting shit I have ever heard in my entire life. I don't know what happens to men when they get older, but old war is fascinating. We need to cut history class out. Get rid of it. And then add a new history class for like 25 to like 35. Just give all the history then, because the guys will eat that up like a bowl of cornflakes. Wait, what does that have to do with Japan?
Let's talk about Japan.
Oh, well, don't make me smile like that when that happens.
World War II, it's their
You
reputation.
can't put fun music when that
To the
happens.
individual, to the unit, to the government, holding out and preferring death to giving up.
Oh.
It's kind of weird they gave up, right?
I really, honest to God, do not know the reason for that photo, but if eyes could tell you anything, and they can, that woman tells 1,000 stories. If it's a woman. I don't actually know. I had long hair, and I'm doing the thing that people have done to me for years.
Like, really, you could make an argument Germany held out longer and more in line with the stereotypical Japanese warrior spirit than Japan itself did. Japan even got like a semi-conditional surrender.
Brother, don't go be patting the Nazis on the back. Hey guys, I gotta say, you got more spirit. I think the word was insanity. I think they had more insanity than Japan. Oh, and you know, Germany didn't have.
Peacefully welcomed an occupation, whereas Germany. How that happened? And
Yeah, that summed it up perfectly.
For some reason, has become this
Guy's good at
huge
his
point of
job.
debate recently. Well, more like a year ago, but this is when I'm getting to it. And it's very dumb because it's turned into this monocausal debate of the true cause of Japan's surrender. But here we go. So there are two arguments. Most people believe that it was the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs that scared Japan.
That's how I always assumed
That
it.
is this camp's be-all, end-all point.
Was that not
given
it?
On August 6th,
Hold
was
on.
dropped, showing Japan that
What's
they
your
were having
counterpoint now?
capability, with the second dropped on the 9th, confirming that it wasn't some kind of one-off thing, and inferring that it could literally be done until there was no one left. Or they gave up. You know, simple cause and effect.
Is it bad that I didn't know there was 2? Oh, I thought it was only 1. Ooh, wow.
Exactly at the designated hour, and the
There's
explosion
a little
occurred
too much
as
glee in your face after that, brother.
The other
Nope,
big one
not
was
anymore.
that Soviet intervention caused Japan's surrender. The story from that point of view goes, a bomb is dropped August 6th, Japan doesn't respond and doesn't care, but on August 9th, the Red Army invades Manchuria, and then the Japanese surrender, and they just kind of ignore the other bomb. I'm gonna let you in on a secret.
Yeah.
Both these takes are dumb. Seriously, whenever people discuss the surrender of Japan and make their case, it always involves the most flagrant use of cherry-picking I have ever seen and ignoring certain facts. And I'm not even including all the counterfactuals when you expand the conversation to the morality of all of it, which, to be extremely clear, is not what this video is about. This is a whole different conversation. We are just talking about what got Japan to quit. I'm not going into that.
Don't worry, buddy. That's what I'm here for. Here's what I think about the morality of it.
I'm back from prison.
Just talking about what got Japan to quit. I'm not going into that. I mean, maybe one day if you ask nice enough. Now,
No.
for all of this to become super clear, all you need is a timeline of events and to work out how they interact with each other, while not leaving any of them out.
Can't stop
By
looking at her.
mid-1945, everybody in Japan knew how bad the situation was.
I want to marry her,
Absolutely
but she's
no
probably
one held
dead.
out any hope for what could be called a victory in the traditional sense of the word. There are no Steiner's counterattacks here. This is Japan in 1945. You are going to die. One thing often missed when talking about this was, at this point, that kind of victory wasn't the goal. The goal was really, at this point, just a negotiated peace to avoid utter defeat. And their plan for this was called Ketsugo. The general idea for it was to bleed the Americans until they gave up. Now, this is not far
That
off from what the Japanese had hoped to do.
seems like a
pretty
horrible
much the
idea,
entire
seeing they're,
war.
like,
They were
triple
always
their
realistic
size.
about the fact that as long as morale held, they were going to get trounced by the United States. But what began as a hope for an anti-war sentiment after Pearl Harbor was now taking its final form here at the end, with now trying to take as many Americans with them as possible and hope there's some Japan left by the time they give up. And this plan was going to be enacted during the American invasion of Japan they knew was coming. These policies were enacted by a council called the Big Six, made up of 4 Navy, 2 Army.
Now, hold on now. You can't just show me a bunch of grumpy old men. This little fun fellow. Who's this little fun fellow? The Minister of the Navy? Isn't it weird, like, how whenever there's some evil power, you got someone like the Prime Minister over here who just looks like he's a stingy old evil man? Is it just like everybody looks evil once they do evil things? Or does the Prime Minister just look like he's just like, But Toko over here looks like a guy who would be making anime where their clothes explodes. Then him being like, this is my art. Different times, folks. Different times. If he was just born 10 more years in the future, he'd be making some beautiful booba jiggle. Oh, and the Chief Army Gen literally looks like the evilest human being alive. There's that. There you go. There's my summary of these beautiful gentlemen that are all dead, and I can make all the jokes I want.
And 1 civilian member that had to agree unanimously on all decisions for the nation. And they were very, very united in this policy. All of this is to say that Japan wasn't just preparing for an invasion, they were hoping for it. It was the goal. They wanted the Americans to come to them and make Okinawa look like a joke, so that those weak-willed Americans would leave them alone. And Japan, although technically defeated in pretty much all its war aims, would still keep its institutions, government, and not be occupied. And until August of 1945, to the Japanese, it looked like that was going to pretty much have to play itself out. But then in the course of less than a week, all of that changed. On August 6, 1945, Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima and destroyed it. But surprisingly, for being the first people to have the literal power of the sun harnessed against them, the Japanese response was actually pretty muted. The Big Six in the government were not really impressed at all.
What? What do you mean they weren't impressed? We literally created one of the most destructive things humankind has ever created, and they're just like, guess they haven't seen my wife. What does that mean? What do you mean? I think they no-sold it. I think they were like, oh, fuck. But they knew if they stayed cool, they're gonna make the Americans be like, oh my gosh, we literally did one of the worst things ever, and they feel nothing, and to scare us. But it turns out, no, the Americans went, oh, really now? Send another!
Japan had a nuclear program during World War II. Although it wasn't successful, it gave them a really good idea of how Herculean a task it was.
Why I
to
just imagine it
create
panned to
one of
them
these
going,
things. And so for those who actually believed it was a nuclear device, They figured there was no way there could be more than one. The Army
Oh,
and Navy's
no!
opinions were even more extreme, with the Army flat out denying that it was a nuclear weapon, demanding more evidence, and the Navy essentially
There's a lot of
saying,
copium
"That's
for someone
neat.
who wears red
Do it
shoes.
5 more times and I might be scared." And as far as official responses from the Japanese government, there was nothing. Fast forward to 3 days later, the Red Army invades Manchuria with fantastic success.
Oh, look how
Essentially rolling over
happy
the
he
Quanzhou
is.
Army and its allies. As you can imagine, this was not ideal. Japan had been doing everything it could to not provoke the Soviet Union this entire war after 1939. And people in the Japanese government had actually been really hoping that the USSR might be convinced to mediate peace talks between they and the US. Peace talks with terms the US would never accept, but nonetheless.
What? Russians and Americans not getting along? Well, just take a look at. Oh boy, that's a lot. Okay, never mind. I forgot. Okay.
They were now fighting large country number 4 at this point. There was still no move to action from the government. Upon hearing the news, Army Chief of Staff, this guy, pretty much dismissed
Lunch
it out of
break.
hand, saying that, yes, this is
Forever
an
lunch
unwelcome
break.
development, but this does not invalidate Ketsugo. Essentially saying, hey, if the Soviets want to land too, it's all killing allies to me. Then, no kidding, about 10 hours after the Soviet invasion begins, another bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, destroying it. But even then still, on the 9th, the Big Six cannot come to a unanimous decision for what to do. It takes until
How?
the next day, August 10th, that an Imperial conference is called and Hirohito makes the decision to surrender, breaking a 3-3 tie on what to do. Now this is normally where the
When are we
retelling
getting to the
ends.
Among Us
This
meme?
leaves
I
the
have to
situation
know
far
how
from
the fuck
sorted,
that
as
connects and
maybe
everything.
the government decided to surrender, but what about the Army? In fact, this whole war started because the Army wasn't listening to the government in 1933. There's absolutely no guarantee that they're going to go along with this. In fact, right after the decision, General Kawabe's deputy chief of staff was asked by another senior general, what if the officers don't follow the order? To which he said without hesitation in his diary, yeah, a lot of them probably won't. And after that, just like he predicted,
At least he's
two
an
of the
honest
3
man.
Japanese area army commanders, one in China and one in Southeast Asia, declared that they would not stop fighting. On top of this, there was actually a coup by a bunch of middle-ranking officers to steal the surrender declaration recording Hirohito made, and probably to kill pro-peace government figures and possibly even try to take control of the emperor himself.
Oh! Oh! I think that's one of those moments if I was prime minister or anybody just being like, oh. Good. Also, isn't it true like there were some people on islands that just they thought the war never ended and just stayed there? Is that true or is that rumor? If there's anyone that knows that, I always wondered if that was true, if there was any actual like soldiers holding out way after on islands and not getting that phone call, you know, boys?
The whole thing was horribly planned and had no chance of success, but it goes to show that the government saying, we give up, is not the end of the story. Skipping ahead, on August 15th, Hirohito's surrender declaration is played to the Japanese people. Now, it mentions
Are they
only
wiggling
the
their
atomic
hats?
bombings and not the invasion of Manchuria by the Soviet Union. This has been used by those who argue the bombs solely ended the war as evidence for the fact that the Soviet Union played no part. But it makes sense why he would only mention this to the Japanese people, who both had a frame of reference for it and were being affected by it. The Soviet invasion of Manchuria would have meant nothing to them, and would not have made any sense as a reason to surrender, being something that was far off on the mainland.
By the way, how bad is that guy at his job? Did you see that? Did you see him check that guy for a gun? He literally squeezed this and went, there's no way that guy's got anything on him. No, what was that? All right, guys, I felt his right nipple. He can't possibly have a grenade. If someone has a grenade and you squeeze his nipple, he goes, "Ee." And you're like, oh, we got you, Senior Togo. 2 packs of grenades. You almost got us. Maybe they did it afterwards. I'm just looking at small bits of video documents. Who knows? Maybe they did it off camera.
Although Japan had officially surrendered, the army just flat
that
out refused to
smarmy
stop
little
fighting the
bastard.
Soviets in many sectors. This, as you can imagine, would be a political nightmare, and could only go on for so long until your enemies just no longer believe that you're actually trying to surrender and start thinking that this was probably just some trick to buy time. So on August 17th, a shorter speech by Hirohito was given to call the military itself to surrender. And although the tone of both speeches
was the
are
short
very
speech?
similar, the call to
We're
action
fucked.
is over
Stop.
the Soviet intervention, with the bombs not being mentioned at all. But this also makes a lot of sense because it is directed at people who aren't in Japan and are bearing the brunt of fighting all these enemies abroad. To the individual commanders, hearing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have been an incredible non-issue given two things. One, cities have been destroyed before. This was another firebombing of Tokyo by a different name. They had to be thinking, we were fine with that when it happened. How is this any different? And they also have no concept of what an atomic bomb even is.
Oh,
So the
that's
magnitude of
true.
the
I
event
never
was
put
just
that to
lost on them.
consideration.
And two, Japan had already decided to fight this thing out till the end and rule over what was left. Since they were doing exactly that in the occupied territories, they 100% expected people to be doing that on the home islands.
We're just gonna drop that footage of ghost women just floating around with their freaking. I know it's bad footage, but that was one of the scariest things ever. That looked like a goddamn rally going on. What the hell was that? You know, we get the troops fired up. Let's get ourselves a good old Asian clan rally. Looks so bad.
Implied that they couldn't really bleed the enemy to a stalemate anymore with a whole nother country arrayed against them. That kind of line of thinking utterly invalidates Ketsugo and was really the only thing that would convince them to lay down their arms. Basically, at this point, there's so much against us, this stalemate or this forcing the enemy to give up just isn't possible anymore. You really see all of this play out post-war in memoirs for both points of view. Generals abroad always say the surrender came from the Soviet intervention. Governmental figures and those on the home islands will say it was the bombs. And that gets to my point. There's no singular reason for Japan's surrender. In the course of 3 days, just 3 days, things went from a terrible situation with basically a national suicide pact to the sky falling, both figuratively and literally, depending on where you were. And even after that, there were still significant holdouts. History is the study of cause and effect, but I think that people often want to make that a lot cleaner than it actually is. No event takes place for a singular reason, especially one as messy as this. So if I had to say why the Japanese surrendered in 1945, I think the Allies had something to do with it.
That's the problem with almost everything in life. People really want a simple, nice bow of it's this one reason and that's why this thing happened. But in reality, life is a cocktail. It's never just one thing. It's always multiple elements that feed into what something happened. And that's a perfect example of it. It's very interesting, though, because I always thought it was the bombs that did it. But I did not ever put into consideration, they'd have no idea what an atomic bomb is. Like, if you dropped it and then, like, say someone made a bigger bomb, they just went, we dropped the double bomb. And we're like, what the hell is that? Would that kill like 7 chickens? I don't give a shit. No, we just keep going. It's not like cell phones exist or anything. It literally was just word of mouth. So yeah, I never put in consideration that. And unless they saw it, they would never have processed it. So that's really fascinating. This whole video was so fascinating. And man, I love history. It's weird to say that. It's so weird. I don't know what it is about humans, especially men. We get this thing where all of a sudden you get a hint of what you've been told over and over as a kid. You're like, hold on, what happened? Maybe it's because kids can't process these massive things that happen. And once you grow up and your brain fully grows, you can actually process how incredible these moments in history were. But I found this video very informative. You know, the thing is, mostly I feel like with World War II, I always think of the German side. It's very interesting to look at the Japanese side. And I thought Potential History did a fantastic job putting it together. Not only adding historical footage of it to for his points and showing it, but also using jokes to make it entertaining. He kept me hooked on the whole 10 minutes. So very well done job from Potential History. And all honesty, I probably will watch more of his content off stream. Yep, I'm going to watch this 1-hour video about the volunteers of the Battle of Gettysburg. I've got to go now and go do that because I had a fun time. I hope you did too. If you enjoy, remember subscribe, like down below, write a comment about this episode. What's your opinion on, because like if you're watching this video, you got hooked on history too, right? That's why you're here if you're watching a reaction to it, right? What got you hooked into history? Were you always, like, was it as a kid? Or was there a moment in time where you all of a sudden it just went, oh, Oh, and then you went down the rabbit hole of the Civil War or World War I or World War II or even further back. And also, I hope you enjoyed this video from I've never done anything like this, so it may have been a disaster. I try to make it funny and make jokes and do my stick, but I don't know if it really worked really well with this kind of video. If it did, I'm glad. If it didn't, I apologize. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.